The first thing you learn in maternity nursing is that silence is never neutral. A quiet baby is either sleeping or something is wrong. And after 11 years on this floor, I could tell the difference by the quality of the air, the way it felt against my skin, the pressure of it. Sleeping quiet has a softness to it, a warmth that radiates from the nursery like a held breath about to release. Wrong quiet is something else entirely. It has weight. It presses against the sternum. At 2:14 in the morning on a Tuesday in March, I was standing at the nurses' station on the 4th floor of Aldermere Regional Medical Center, charting vitals for room 412, when I noticed it. Not a sound. Not one. 14 infants in the ward nursery and not a single one of them making noise. My name is Dara Osei. I am a registered nurse, 12-year veteran of labor and delivery, and I want to be very precise about what I am going to tell you because I have spent a lot of time since then being told I was wrong about the sequence of events. I was not wrong. The silence came first. Everything else came after. I set down my pen. The nursery is visible from the station through a long interior window, a design feature the hospital installed in the 90s for monitoring efficiency. I could see all 14 bassinets from where I stood. The overhead lights in the nursery were dimmed to the standard nighttime setting, that particular shade of amber that is meant to be soothing. I could see the shapes of the infants through the glass. Small, swaddled, motionless. Not one of them was crying. 14 newborns ranging from 6 hours old to 3 days old, and not one of them was making a sound. I walked to the window. I pressed my palm against the glass. The way you press your hand to a car hood to check for heat. Some instinct older than training. The glass was cool. I looked at each bassinet in sequence, the habit of rounds, the muscle memory of surveillance. Chest rises, color in lips, position of hands. All 14 were fine, breathing, pink, eyes either closed or open and fixed somewhere above them, at the ceiling, at the light, at something I could not locate from my side of the glass. That was the part that stayed with me longest. The ones with open eyes weren't blinking at the light. They weren't tracking movement. They were looking at something with a steadiness that newborns are not supposed to have. Newborns are not focused creatures. Their eyes drift, flutter, roll softly. These eyes were still. I told myself it was the hour. I told myself I was tired. I had been on shift for 9 hours and had consumed approximately 400 milligrams of caffeine and the kind of dry-eyed exhaustion that makes the ordinary look strange. I went back to my charting, but I left the pen uncapped. 15 minutes later, I walked back to the window and looked again. Still nothing. Still that amber-lit room full of silent, still children who were by every observable metric perfectly fine, and by some other metric I had no clinical language for absolutely not. I picked up the intercom handset and buzzed the nursery. Rhea picked up on the second buzz. Rhea Sandoval, 28, 3 years on the floor, the kind of nurse who laughs at things that would make other people cry because it is the only valve she has found that works. Her voice came through the handset with that particular flatness of someone who is also trying to locate the source of a feeling they haven't named yet. "Yeah," she said. Not a question. "Are they sleeping?" I asked. A pause. Not a long pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But on a night like that, in a silence like that, 2 seconds is a country. "They're not sleeping," Rhea said. I waited. "They're just not crying," she said. "Dara, they've been like this for about 20 minutes, and I've checked everyone. Everyone is fine. I don't know what this is." I told her to document the time and keep watching. I told her I'd call Dr. Fossey if it continued past 30 minutes. I told her this in the voice I use when I'm trying to make something sound manageable that does not feel manageable. I hung up the intercom. I stood at the window for a moment longer, looking at 14 small human beings who should, by every biological imperative of their age and condition, have been crying about something. Hunger, cold, the overwhelming and novel catastrophe of existing outside the womb. They were not crying, they were waiting. I didn't know what they were waiting for. I wouldn't know for another 3 hours. Dr. Priya Fossey arrived on the floor at 2:51 a.m., which was not unusual. Priya ran on 4 hours of sleep and professional anxiety in roughly equal measure, and she had once told me that the only difference between a good physician and a great one was the willingness to come in when something didn't feel right, even if you couldn't articulate why. She stood at the nursery window with her arms crossed and her mouth in that particular configuration she wore when she was solving a problem she didn't have enough variables for yet. Priya was 44, small, precise, the kind of woman whose stillness reads as intensity because it usually is. "You said 20 minutes when you called," she said. "How long now?" 57 minutes, I said. She looked at me, then back at the nursery. "All 14. All 14. She pushed through the nursery door and I followed her, and we moved through the room together in the practiced choreography of two people who have done rounds together long enough to anticipate each other's movements. She checked the first bassinet. Baby girl, 8 hours old, born to a mother named Cynthia in room 408. The baby's eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling. Priya passed a pen light across the infant's field of vision. The eyes tracked. Pupils responded. She moved on. She checked all 14. When she came back to me, her face was composed in the way that medical faces compose themselves when composure is an act of will, rather than a state of being. "Vitals are normal," she said. "Yes." "Neurological responses are within range." "Yes." "No fever, no respiratory distress, no apparent pain indicators." "No." She looked back through the window at the room. "This is not normal," she said. And the thing about Priya saying that was that she was not someone who said it lightly. She had a taxonomy for abnormal, a detailed and precise internal ranking system, and the way she said it told me this had landed near the top. "I know," I said. "I want a neonate consult in the morning," she said, "and I want hourly checks, documented, time-stamped, everything." "Already started," she nodded. She stood at the window for another 30 seconds without speaking, which for Priya was a long time. Then she said, "Have you noticed anything else? Anything on the floor tonight that felt off?" And this was the moment where I should have mentioned the other thing. The thing I had noticed an hour earlier and filed under the category of coincidence because I had no framework yet for what it meant. A patient in room 414, a man named Gerald Tuck, who had come in 2 days ago with symptoms his primary care physician had diagnosed as a severe flu, had gone quiet in the same way. Not the baby quiet, not the eerie stillness of the nursery, but quiet in the way that a person who has been moaning through a fever for 48 hours goes quiet, and you notice the absence of a sound you had stopped consciously registering. I had checked on him at 1:30. He was lying on his back, eyes open, the same ceiling-fixed stare. His vitals were fine. His fever had broken. I had noted it as improvement and moved on. I should have mentioned him to Priya. I know that now with the clear and useless precision of retrospect. But I had no connection yet between a ward of silent newborns and a middle-aged man with a flu whose fever had broken. They were in different wings. They were different categories of patient. The only thing they shared was a quality of stillness that my body had registered and my brain had not yet translated. "No," I said to Priya. "Nothing else." She left at 3:07 a.m. Ria found me at the station 10 minutes later. She had a cup of coffee in each hand, and the expression she wore when she was about to say something she had been working up to for a while. "Can I tell you something without you doing the charge nurse thing?" she asked. "Probably not," I said, "but tell me anyway." She sat in the chair beside mine and wrapped both hands around her own cup. "I've been in there for an hour," she said, "with all of them. And I know this is going to sound like something I should not say out loud in a medical facility, but the way they're looking at the ceiling, all of them, at the same spot." She paused. "I checked. It's the same spot. Like there's something there that I can't see." I looked at her. Ria did not frighten easily. She had worked a night in the ER during a 4-car pileup and come back to L&D the next shift, making dark jokes about blood pressure. Whatever she was feeling right now was not easy fright. It was the considered, specific unease of someone who trusted their own observations. "Document the time," I said. "Everything you observe, you document." She nodded. She stood up. She stopped halfway to the nursery door and turned back. "Dara," she said, "when do we start worrying?" I didn't answer her because the honest answer was that I had already started. Aldermere Regional was not a large hospital. 4 floors, 2 wings, a cardiac unit that shared the 3rd floor with orthopedics, and our floor labor, delivery, and postpartum, which occupied the entirety of the 4th. We had 16 patient rooms, a nursery, 2 delivery suites, a break room the size of a large closet, and a single elevator that had been out of service since February. The stairs were at the far end of the east wing. I tell you the layout because it matters. In the hours that followed, the geography of that floor became the geography of survival, and I want you to understand it the way I understood it: the distances, the doors, the places where the light was good, and the places where it wasn't. At 3:22 a.m., Marcus Webb called from the nursing station on the 3rd floor. Marcus was the overnight charge for cardiac, a large, methodical man who had been at Aldermere for 19 years and who communicated in the compressed, efficient language of someone who had learned that most words are surplus. "Dara," he said, "you got a patient on your floor named Tuck? Gerald Tuck?" 414, I said. "He's not mine, he's overflow from internal medicine." "Why?" "Because his wife is down here," Marcus said. "Room 302. She came in about 4 hours ago, presenting with the same symptoms he had when he admitted. Flu-like, high fever. And about 40 minutes ago, her fever broke, and she went quiet in a way that is making my staff uncomfortable. The connection I had failed to make an hour earlier made itself without my permission." "Define uncomfortable," I said. "Lying still, eyes open, responsive to stimulus, but not initiating anything. Not talking, not moving. Like she's—" He paused, and Marcus Webb did not pause mid-sentence. It was not a habit he had. "Like she's listening for something," he said. I told him I'd come down. I told Rhea where I was going and asked her to keep documenting. I took the stairs, which put me at the far end of the east corridor of the 3rd floor, and I walked to 302 with that particular floor quiet that hospitals have at 3 in the morning, the hum of equipment, the distant sound of a television someone left on in a room somewhere, the specific quality of fluorescent light that makes everything look slightly posthumous. Eleanor Tuck was 51 years old. She was a retired school teacher. There was a get well card taped to the wall above her bed, hand-drawn, clearly from a child, with the words, "Feel better, Grandma," in orange crayon. She was lying on her back with her hands flat at her sides and her eyes open and fixed at the ceiling, and she was absolutely, completely still. I spoke her name. Her eyes moved to me, slow and deliberate, and she looked at me without expression. "Mrs. Tuck," I said, "how are you feeling?" "Fine," she said. The word came out flat and clean, like a door closing. "Are you in any pain?" "No." "Are you cold?" "Warm. Do you need anything?" She looked at me for a moment. Something passed through her eyes that was almost a question. Then she looked back at the ceiling. "No," she said. "I don't need anything." I checked her vitals. Temperature 98.2, down from 103.6 4 hours ago. Blood pressure normal. Oxygen saturation 99%. Heart rate 62, slow and even. I stood at the foot of her bed and looked at her and thought about her husband on the floor above me, lying in the same position, and the 14 infants in my nursery looking at the same spot on the ceiling, and the quality of the silence in the hallway outside this room, which was, and I want to be precise about this, 3 degrees quieter than it should have been, as though the building itself had decided to hold its breath. On my way back to the stairs, I stopped at the nurse's station and told Marcus Webb what I had observed, and that I thought someone should contact the attending for the Tucks and request a neurology consult. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has 19 years of bureaucratic muscle memory fighting against a newer, less categorized instinct. "On a Tuesday at 3 in the morning, he said. "Yes," I said. He picked up the phone. I took the stairs back to 4. The break room on our floor had a window that faced east. Over the hospital parking lot, and beyond it, the beginning of the residential grid of the town, small houses and streetlights, and the particular darkness of a March night that is cold enough to keep people inside. I stood at that window at 3:48 a.m. with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm, and I tried to assemble what I had into something that had a shape. 2 patients. Separate wings, separate floors, connected by relationship and identical symptom trajectory. Flu-like onset, high fever, and then sudden resolution into this strange, flat, still state. Not unconscious, not unresponsive, just switched to minimum. And 14 newborns who had stopped crying at almost exactly the same time Eleanor Tuck's fever broke. I am a nurse, not an epidemiologist. I am trained to observe and respond and escalate within the defined channels of my institution. I am not trained to theorize. But I have 11 years of pattern recognition built into my nervous system, the kind of training that isn't knowledge so much as a physical awareness, a sensitivity to the shape of things when the shape is wrong. Something was wrong. I went to find our ward clerk, a woman named Sandra, who was 63 years old and had worked nights at Aldermere since before I was born, and who knew more about the administrative architecture of the hospital than anyone in administration did. Sandra was at her desk doing a crossword puzzle with the focused intensity she brought to everything. Sandra, I said, in the last 24 hours, any unusual admissions, anything that came in flagged or that the attending kicked back, or anything that felt out of pattern? She looked up at me over her reading glasses. Sandra had a very efficient face, the kind that does not waste expression. You mean besides the Tuck situation? She said. Besides that, anything. She set down her pencil. She thought for a moment with the same concentration she'd been applying to 23 across. 2 EMS transfers came up from the ER around midnight, she said. Both went to internal medicine overflow. I don't have details, but the paramedic who brought the second one, I heard him tell the admitting nurse it was the third case he'd brought in tonight with the same presentation. Same as the Tucks? I didn't hear the presentation. I heard him say third case tonight, and I heard the admitting nurse say she'd flagged it for infectious disease. I stood there for a moment. Sandra, I said, did infectious disease respond? She picked up her pencil. It's 3 a.m, she said. It was not an answer. It was the answer. I went back to the station and pulled up the internal messaging system and sent a flag to the ID attending on call. I documented the time. I noted the connection between the Tuck patients, the nursery anomaly, and the information from Sandra. I used careful clinical language. I did not write that I was frightened. I did not write that the silence on the 4th floor felt like pressure. I wrote factual observations in timestamp sequence, and I sent it through the proper channel, and I waited for the proper channel to respond. Rhea came and stood beside me. The babies, she said. Still? One of them cried, she said, about 10 minutes ago. Just one, for about 4 seconds, and then it stopped and looked at the ceiling again. She paused. The others didn't react. Usually if one starts, they all start. That's not how this works, Dara. I know. What is this? She asked. Not the way you ask a question you expect an answer to. The way you ask it when you need someone to confirm that you are not losing your mind, that the strangeness you are perceiving is real and shared. I don't know yet, I said, but I'm not going to stop until I do. It was 3:59 a.m. In 61 minutes, Gerald Tuck would be the first person on our floor to stand up out of his bed and walk into the hallway. He would not be walking the way Gerald Tuck walked. I want to tell you exactly what I saw, and I want to tell you it in sequence, because the sequence is the part that people have gotten wrong in every account I've read since. The sequence is everything. At 4:47 a.m., the call light from room 414 came on. I answered it at the station. Room 414, what do you need? Nothing. Open channel, the sound of a room, the hum of medical equipment, and then a sound I can only describe as movement. Not footsteps. The sound of a person who has learned movement as a concept but not as a practice. The sound of weight shifting in an unfamiliar way. I told Rhea to stay in the nursery, and I walked to 414. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. Gerald Tuck was standing at the foot of his own bed. He was 53 years old, heavy-set, with the hands of someone who had spent decades doing physical work, and he was standing in his hospital gown with his arms at his sides and his eyes at the window. Not at me, at the window, at something outside it or past it or beyond the concept of it entirely. Mr. Tuck, I said. He turned toward me. The turning was slow, deliberate. Not the way a confused post-fever patient turns toward a voice. There's a quality to that, a searching quality, eyes looking for the source of the sound before the head follows. He turned all at once, head and body together, in a single piece, and his eyes landed on me with the same fixed, ceiling quality steadiness I had seen in the nursery. His lips moved. "Mr. Tuck, you should be in bed. Can you tell me how you're feeling?" His lips moved again, and this time sound came with it, low and approximate, like someone trying to locate a word they learned in another language. "Out," he said. "You want to go out?" "Out," he said again, with more insistence. And then he took a step toward me, and I stepped back, not from threat, not yet, but from the way his step landed, from the way his foot hit the floor with a flatness and a certainty that was wrong for a man who had been bedridden with a 104 fever for 48 hours. I pressed the call button on the wall panel beside the door. "I need assistance in 414, I said. "Non-emergency, but I need another set of hands." Sandra's voice came back. "On it." I stayed in the doorway and I watched Gerald Tuck, and I spoke to him in the quiet, level tone I use for patients who are confused or frightened or both. I told him he was in the hospital. I told him his wife was here too, one floor down. I told him everything was all right. His eyes did not change. They stayed on me with that particular quality of attention that was not recognition and not threat, but something between the two, something that had no clinical name yet. Sandra appeared behind me in the hall. I heard her breath catch. "Go get Dr. Fossey," I said without turning around. "Right now." "She's not on call, Dara." "I know. Get her anyway." Sandra left. I stood in the doorway and Gerald Tuck stood at the foot of his bed, and we looked at each other, and the silence between us was the same silence that had been building since 2:14 a.m., the same silence that was in the nursery, and in room 302, and in the hallway, and in my chest where my heartbeat was doing something careful and controlled and very fast. "Mr. Tuck," I said, "I need you to sit back down." He took another step toward me, and then from somewhere below us, from the third floor, came a sound that I had never heard inside a hospital and hope I never hear again. It was not a scream. Screams have panic in them, a human quality of terror that is its own kind of communication. This was a sound of impact, something hard against something harder, and then silence, and then a sound like many feet moving at once in the same direction, fast, with that same flat, certain quality I had just seen in Gerald Tuck's step. And then from the third floor, through the bones of the building, one real scream, one human, terrified scream, and then nothing. Gerald Tuck's head tilted toward the sound, just slightly, the way an animal orients to a frequency. I pulled the door closed and locked it from the outside with my key card, and I stood in the empty hallway of the fourth floor, and I understood for the first time with my whole body, not just my professional mind, that whatever was happening was not going to be resolved by a neurology consult. Priya Fossey arrived on the floor at 5:04 a.m. She had driven from her apartment 6 blocks away in the clothes she'd slept in, her hair still down, which was how I knew she had moved fast. Priya maintained a certain presented composure at all times. Her hair being down meant she had run. I met her at the stairwell door and I told her everything. All of it. The nursery, the tucks, the ID flag I'd sent, what Sandra had told me about the ER transfers, and what I had just heard from the third floor. She listened without interrupting. Priya was good at that, at the specific discipline of receiving information before responding to it. When I finished, she said, "Have you been able to reach anyone from the third floor?" "I've called the station 3 times. No answer." She absorbed this. "The patients on this floor," she said. "How many are ambulatory?" "The postpartum patients, 6 of them, could walk if they needed to. 2 are post-C-section. They're limited. We have 1 patient in active labor in Suite B. She's been going for 6 hours. The overflow patients in 411 through 415. There are 4 of them, including Tuck." "Tuck is locked in 414? "Yes, he was." I searched for the word. "He was responsive to stimulus. He was moving toward me. I don't know what he would have done if I'd stayed." Priya looked at the door to 414 from where we stood. Gerald Tuck had not attempted to open it since I'd locked it. That was either reassuring or more disturbing than the alternative, and I couldn't decide which. We need to know what's on 3, Priya said. I know. I'm going to go look. No, I said. She looked at me. I'm going to go look, I said. You need to stay with the floor. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, you lock the stairwell door from this side. There's a manual bolt. It doesn't need a key card. Dara! Priya, listen to me. I waited until she was fully looking at me and not at the calculations I could see running behind her eyes. 14 infants, 6 postpartum mothers, 1 woman in active labor. Whatever is on 3, you cannot leave this floor unmanned. She held my gaze for a moment, then she nodded. I went through the stairwell door and let it close behind me. The stairwell was cold. Hospitals maintain temperature differentials between patient areas and service corridors, and the stairwell always ran 5 degrees cooler than the floor. But this was colder than that. I stood on the landing between 3 and 4, and I looked down at the 3rd floor door, and I listened. Sounds. Movement. That same flat, purposeful, non-human quality of foot on floor that I had heard from Gerald Tuck. More of it. Multiple. Coming from multiple directions within the 3rd floor, but none of it approaching the stairwell door. And from somewhere within, a voice. One voice. Controlled. Speaking in brief bursts, the cadence of someone on a phone. I thought it might be Marcus. I went down to the 3rd floor landing. I pressed my ear to the door. The voice was closer now, on the other side of the door, and I could make out words. 4th floor. You need to tell 4th floor. Do not use the elevator. There are... A pause. A sound. The voice dropped. There are at least 6 of them in the East Wing. They are not responding to anything. One of the nurses... Another pause longer. The voice broke just once, just a crack in it. Then it steadied. I need you to call CDC. I need you to call whoever you call. And I need you to tell 4th floor to lock their stairwell door. I pushed open the door and Marcus Webb looked at me from 4 feet away with his phone pressed to his ear and an expression that was relief and horror in equal proportion. Dara, he said, get back up. Get back up right now. Behind him at the end of the corridor, I could see 3 of them, moving, coming toward the light. I went back up. I threw the bolt. I stood on the 4th floor landing and breathed for 10 seconds, and then I went back through the door to where Priya was waiting. Lock it, I said, right now, and we need to talk about the nursery. The nursery had a second door. This is the fact that restructured everything. In a normal night, in a normal hospital, the nursery had 2 access points, the main door visible from the nurse's station, which required a key card, and a secondary door at the rear of the room that opened into the service corridor. The service corridor connected to the stairwell, the same stairwell I had just bolted. I had bolted the stairwell door on the 4th floor landing. The service corridor accessed the nursery from a different point on the stairwell, 1 floor below the landing. The bolt would not cover it. I stood at the nurse's station with Priya, and I explained this, and I watched her face do the rapid, precise recalculation of someone whose professional training is entirely about variables and outcomes. Key card only, she asked. Key card and a manual PIN code. But if something pressed against that door with enough force, the mechanism, it's not built for that. How long would it hold? I don't know. She looked at the nursery through the window. 14 infants, still silent, still looking at the ceiling or at whatever they had been looking at since 2:14 a.m. when all of this began. Ria was in the nursery. She had been in the nursery for 2 hours, moving from bassinet to bassinet, maintaining presence, doing the work of being human in the room with them because something in her had decided they needed that, even if the clinical rationale for it was unclear. We have to tell Ria, I said. Yes, Priya said. And we have to make a decision about the nursery. What decision? I had been building toward this since the stairwell, since I saw them at the end of Marcus's corridor. I had been building toward it and hoping Priya would get there first so I wouldn't have to be the one to say it. The nursery has 14 infants, I said. It also has a compromised access point. If we consolidate, if we move the infants out of the nursery and into the postpartum rooms, we lose the secondary access vulnerability. But we create a different problem. We're moving 14 neonates at 5 in the morning with a skeleton staff, and whatever is happening on 3 is still happening, Priya said. Still happening. She put her hands flat on the desk. A grounding gesture, I recognized it. The alternative, she said, is to secure the service corridor door from inside the nursery and keep Rhea in there. Yes. Which means if the corridor door fails, Rhea is locked in the nursery with 14 infants and no second exit. The word caught in my throat. Yes. Priya straightened. She made a decision the way she always made decisions. Not with drama, not with deliberation drawn out for comfort, but with the clean finality of someone who has accepted that all available options are bad, and the only remaining question is which bad option she can live with. We move the infants, she said. We do it now, we do it quickly, and we split them across the 2 postpartum rooms with the highest functional capacity. Rooms 406 and 409, I said. Both mothers are ambulatory, both have partners present. Good. I'll tell them what's happening. How much will you tell them? She looked at me. Enough, she said. I went to get Rhea. Rhea took the news the way Rhea took most things that were too large for immediate processing. She made a joke that wasn't funny and then got to work. 14 babies, she said. 1 at a time, or can we stack them? Rhea. I know. Okay. She pulled off her gloves and put on new ones and looked at the room around her with the expression of someone reorienting to a task. We start with the oldest, right? Most stable, most tolerant of transition? You're thinking about this the right way, I said. I'm terrified, she said. I'm thinking about it the right way because otherwise I'll stop functioning, and we can't afford that. No, I said, we can't. We moved the infants in pairs, which was as fast as we could safely manage. Rhea took one, I took one. We walked to 406 or 409 and settled the infant and went back for the next. The mothers in both rooms, a woman named Claire in 406 and a woman named Denise in 409, had been woken by Priya and told in measured terms that there was a developing situation on the lower floors and that we were consolidating the nursery as a precautionary measure. Claire's partner, a man named Josh, who was one of those people who becomes very quiet and very efficient when confronted with genuine emergency, had immediately begun rearranging the room to accommodate more bassinets. Denise's mother, who had been sleeping in the recliner in the corner and who had a voice like a ship's foghorn and the organizational instincts of a field general, had taken charge of keeping Denise calm, which was its own significant act of crisis management. We were on the 7th infant when the sound started in the service corridor. Not banging, not the frantic human sound of someone trying to get through a door. A rhythmic, even pressure, like something leaning against the door and then withdrawing and then leaning again, in a cycle, patient and persistent and completely without urgency, as though whatever was on the other side of that door had time, as though it was not working toward a goal so much as following an impulse in the way water follows a gradient. Rhea and I stopped in the middle of the nursery and looked at the corridor door. The sound continued. How long? Rhea asked. Her voice was level. Her hands were not shaking. She was holding the 7th infant and her hands were not shaking, and I want to note that because I think it says something true about who Rhea Sandoval is. I don't know, I said. Keep moving? We kept moving. On the 11th infant, the corridor door's status light changed from green to amber. Not red. Amber. The mechanism was under stress, but had not failed. On the 13th infant, it changed to red. We had 1 infant left, a boy, 6 hours old, the most recently born on the floor, unnamed as yet because his mother was still in Suite B, working through her 6th hour of labor. He was the smallest of the 14. He weighed, according to my last check, 6 pounds and 3 ounces. He was looking at the ceiling. He was not crying. I picked him up and walked out of the nursery, and Rhea closed the nursery door behind us, and we were in the hallway when we heard the corridor door to the nursery give. We did not run. You cannot run with a 6-hour-old infant. You walk with purpose and control, and you do not look behind you, and you hold the infant against your chest, and you walk to room 409, where Denise and her mother and 12 other infants, and the weight of everything you have decided tonight are waiting for you. I set the boy in the last available bassinet. He looked at the ceiling. The nursery, behind us, was empty and compromised. We had moved all 14 infants. We had taken 31 minutes. I did not feel relief. I did not feel anything that resembled relief. I felt the specific, sober clarity of someone who understands that they have just bought time, not safety, and that time is a resource with a remaining balance they cannot calculate. Priya had been managing the rest of the floor while Ria and I ran the nursery. I found her in the hallway outside room 412, speaking in a low, controlled voice to a woman named Anita, a postpartum patient who had woken to the sounds and was standing in her doorway with the particular combination of new mother adrenaline and medically compromised mobility that made everything about her current situation more dangerous. "Mrs. Halder," Priya was saying, "I need you to go back inside and stay there. I know this is frightening. I am going to explain more as soon as I can. Right now, the most important thing you can do is be in that room with your baby." "My baby is in the nursery," Anita said. Priya looked at me. "Your baby is in room 409, I said. "We moved all the nursery infants to postpartum rooms. Your daughter is safe. She's in a 409 with the Hendersons." Something shifted in Anita's face. The acute edge of her fear smoothed slightly, not gone, but reorganized around a different center. "Can I go be with her?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Come with me." I walked Anita to 409, which was now the most populated room on the floor, and was beginning to have the quality of a wartime shelter, functional, crowded, held together by human effort, and the refusal of everyone in it to give in to what they actually felt. Denise's mother had found a second recliner from somewhere and dragged it to the room. Josh from 406 appeared in the doorway about 30 seconds later, with both hands full of granola bars from the vending machine, which he distributed without comment or fanfare, the logistics of emergency care reduced to its most essential and human form. I was on my way back to Priya when Ria caught my arm. "The patient's in overflow," she said. 411 through 415. Tuck is locked in 414. "But the other three, do we know what condition they're in?" I had not checked them since before I went to the third floor. We went together. 411 was a woman named Margaret, 67, post-hip replacement, the most immobile patient on the floor. She was awake and aware and frightened in the way that older patients get frightened in hospitals at night, quietly, containedly. In a way that made me think she had learned not to be a burden and was applying that lesson now when it was least appropriate. "Something's happened," she said when we came in. "Yes," I said. "We're handling it." "Is it bad?" "Yes." She looked at me for a moment. "Good," she said, "that you told me the truth. I can work with the truth." 412 was empty. The patient, a man named Craig, had apparently gotten up and left at some point during the night. His bed was empty. His IV had been pulled, not removed, pulled, and his shoes were still on the floor beside the bed, which told me he had left without them. "He was ambulatory," Ria said. "He could have gone to the bathroom. He could have—" "His IV was pulled," I said. We looked at each other. 413 was a teenage girl named Jess who had been admitted for monitoring after a complication in her third trimester. She was awake. She was sitting up in bed with her knees drawn up to her chest as far as her pregnancy allowed, and she was looking at the door with the hyper-alert stillness of someone who has been listening to the hallway for a long time and has not liked what they heard. "Where's my phone?" she said when we came in. "They took my phone when I admitted. I need my phone. My mom doesn't know what's happening." "I'm going to get your phone," I said, "right now, and I'm going to move you to a different room. Can you walk?" "Yes." "Where are we going?" "What's in the hall? I heard something in the hall, and it wasn't right." "You're right," I said. "It wasn't right. Come with us." She got out of bed. She was 17 years old and 8 months pregnant, and she got out of bed with a determination that I want to remember correctly, that I want to describe accurately, because it was one of the genuinely courageous things I saw that night. Not reckless courage, knowing courage. The courage of someone who has assessed the situation and decided that movement is better than stillness regardless of how uncomfortable movement is. We had Jess halfway to 409 when the lights went out. Emergency lighting. Red-tinged, low, casting everything in a palette that the human brain is not designed to find reassuring. The generator kicked in 4 seconds after the main power failed. 4 seconds that felt like a different kind of duration entirely. A duration measured not in time but in heartbeats, and the sound of Jess making a sound beside me that was not quite a word. "I've got you," I said. "Keep moving." We got her to 409. I counted heads. We had, in room 409, Denise, her mother, Anita, Claire, Josh, 14 infants, and now Jess. In room 406, we had the Hendersons, who had relocated to 409 with the infants. In 411, we had Margaret. Priya was at the station. She had a flashlight and the hospital emergency radio, a device that had been tested quarterly for the 6 years I'd worked here, and which had, as far as I knew, never been used for an actual emergency. She was trying to reach the hospital administration emergency line. "Anything from outside?" I said. "The admin line is ringing. No pickup." She lowered the radio. "I reached an outside line through the nurse's station landline about 20 minutes ago and got a busy signal on 911. Busy signal. Busy signal. The specific flatness with which she said it told me she understood exactly what a 911 busy signal implied about the scale of what was happening beyond our walls. "CDC," I said. "Marcus was asking someone to call CDC." "Marcus," she said and stopped. "I know," I said. I didn't know what had happened to Marcus. I didn't know what had happened to anyone on 3 after I came back up the stairs. I was not going to think about it. Not yet. "We have to think about what we have," I said. "Supplies. We have the medication room. Is it locked?" "Locked, and I have the key. We have the break room fridge. I don't know what's in it, but it's something. We have—" I was running inventory by memory, the practiced automatic assessment of a person who has spent 12 years in a resource-limited environment. "We have 3 full emergency kits. Those are in the supply closet. I have my key card. You have yours." "Sandra," Priya said. "Sandra has master access." I had not seen Sandra since I sent her to get Priya. "Where is she?" "I don't know." The radio crackled. Static, then a voice, brief and fragmented. The kind of transmission that arrives through interference. It said something I could not fully parse. The word contain was clear. The word floor and the word hospital, and then something that sounded like a protocol designation, a numbered sequence, and then nothing. "Did you catch that?" I asked. "Enough," Priya said. We looked at each other in the red-tinted emergency light, and I thought about what I had seen at the end of Marcus Webb's corridor. Those 3 figures moving through the fluorescent light with that flat, certain, patient forward motion. And I thought about Gerald Tuck in his room and the way he had set out with the insistence of a word that was not a request. And I thought about the 14 infants who had stopped crying at 2:14 a.m. and what they might have known, if knowing is even the right framework for what they did. "What do we do?" I said. Not rhetorical, not helpless. A direct question from one professional to another. The kind of question you only ask when you trust the person completely. Priya was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "We stay on this floor. We keep the stairwell bolt locked. We keep the door to 414 locked. We keep everyone in the 2 rooms. We try every external communication channel we have until one of them works, and we wait. And if whatever is in the corridor gets to Tuck's room door..." She looked at the closed door of 414. The hallway outside it was still, for now. "Then we deal with that when it happens," she said. It was the most honest thing she could have said, and we both knew it. I found Sandra at 5:52 a.m. She was in the supply closet at the end of the west wing, sitting on the floor between 2 shelving units with her legs drawn up and a hospital-issue blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was holding her crossword puzzle book in both hands, not doing the puzzle, just holding it, in the way that people hold the physical objects that belong to their ordinary life when the ordinary life is no longer guaranteed. She looked up when I opened the door, and I saw something cross her face that was close to relief, and further from it than you'd think. "The light's going out," she said. That scared me more than the rest of it. "I know." I crouched down beside her. "Sandra, are you hurt?" "No." She paused. "I saw one of them. In the hall just before the lights went. One of the internal medicine overflow patients from 413. Or it was him. It was his body. He was walking up the hall toward me, and he didn't look right. and I went in here. Craig, I said. From 413. His feet, she said. The way he was walking. Like something wearing feet that didn't fit. I know. What is this, she said. For the second time tonight, someone had asked me that question and meant it as a need for confirmation, not information. I don't know exactly, I said, but I know what we're doing about it. And I need your master access card. And I need you to come with me. She stood up. She straightened her scrubs. She tucked the crossword book under her arm with a deliberateness that I found absurdly comforting. All right, she said, let's go. We moved through the West Wing with Sandra's flashlight and the low emergency lighting, and I checked every room as we passed it. The overflow patients from 411 through 415. Margaret was still secure. Jess had been moved. 413 was empty. 414 was still locked and still quiet. 415 held a post-surgical patient named Rowan, who was, when I opened the door, awake, frightened, and connected to an IV that was going to complicate mobility significantly. Can you walk? I asked Rowan. The IV. I can move the pole, I said. Can you walk? Yes. Then come with us. We collected Rowan and we went back to the station and I did a complete count. Everyone who was ambulatory and not compromised was in 406 or 409. Margaret was in 411, which was not ideal but was manageable. Gerald Tuck was in 414. Whatever had been Craig was somewhere on the floor. The service corridor door to the nursery, which was now empty, had given. Whatever had come through it had access to the floor. We had not yet encountered it in the main hallway, which meant either it had not come through yet, or it had come through and was somewhere in the West Wing or the supply areas. I told this to Priya, all of it, plainly. She absorbed it. Then she said, the break room, end of the East Wing, it has a heavy interior door, no secondary access, and the window is reinforced. You want to consolidate everyone in the break room? It's the most defensible interior space on the floor. It's a closet, Priya. We have 14 infants. We have 14 infants, 6 mothers, 2 partners, 3 other patients, and us. The break room is approximately 60 square feet. The alternative is staying in rooms with compromised corridor access. She paused. I know what I'm asking. I'm asking because it's the right call. I thought about the closet-sized break room. I thought about 14 bassinets. I thought about what it would mean to move everyone again, the logistics of it, the time it would take, the exposure in the hallway. And then the door to 414 opened. The lock I had used on Gerald Tuck's room was a keycard lock. Keycard locks at Aldermere required both a card swipe and a confirmation beep. I had locked it from the outside. I had not considered, in the urgency of everything that followed, that it could be opened from the inside without a card. A manual interior release. Standard fire safety code. Standard hospital design. Gerald Tuck walked out of 414 and into the hallway. He was not moving the way he had been when I'd seen him before. The slow, deliberate, single-piece turning was gone. He was moving with purpose now, faster, and the purpose was directional toward the light at the nurse's station, toward where Priya and I were standing. Priya said, Gerald. Calm, clinical. One word, his name, the way you say a name to a confused patient to reorient them. He did not slow down. She said it again. He turned his head toward her voice and his eyes fixed on her with that flat, sealing quality. The eyes that were present and attending, but were not recognizing in the way that recognition means anything human. And he kept moving. I stepped between them. Mr. Tuck, I said. Louder, more forceful. The voice I used not often. The voice I have almost never needed in 12 years of nursing, because nursing is about de-escalation, and this situation was not. He stopped. Not because of my voice. He stopped as if something else had occurred to him. Some signal from a source that was not me. And he stood in the hallway and his head tilted and he looked past me, down the East Wing corridor, toward the door of the break room and the rooms beyond it, toward 409 where the infants were. Something in his face changed. Not expression exactly, more like a attention sharpening. The way a light changes quality when you adjust the focus. He turned and walked the other way, toward the West Wing, toward the supply areas and the empty nursery and whatever else had come through the service corridor. I watched him go. Priya put her hand on my arm, not grabbing, not restraining, just contact, the communication of a presence that was still there. He responded to something, she said, very quietly. Yes, I said, from the nursery direction. Yes, but the nursery is empty. I looked at her. She looked at me. The infants, I said, are in 409. The infants stopped crying, she said. Something made them stop. And whatever made them stop is either something they know or something they're doing. And if it's something they're doing, then it's been keeping them safe, I said. Neither of us had a language for this. We were two medical professionals in the early morning of something unprecedented, and we were building hypotheses out of observation in real time. The same process we used every day, but never under these conditions and never with these stakes. We do not move the infants to the break room, Priya said. We leave them in 409. Yes. And we stay close. Yes. It was 6:17 a.m. Whatever the infants knew or were doing it was holding. Gerald Tuck had turned away from them. The hallway outside 409 was quiet. The silence that had started this night was still doing its work, and I was no longer sure whether it was the most frightening thing in this building or the only thing holding it together. The first external contact came at 6:44 a.m., not through the radio, through Jess's phone, which I had retrieved from the admissions lockbox using Sandra's MasterCard, and which Jess had used to text her mother, and her mother had apparently forwarded those texts to someone who had some connection to a county emergency management chain. Because at 6:44 a call came through on that phone from a number with a government area code, and a man on the other end who identified himself as a coordinator with the State Health Emergency Response Office. His name was Officer Dietrich, or that was what I heard, and he spoke with the focused brevity of someone who was managing 15 simultaneous situations and had allocated us a specific amount of his attention. I took the phone, I gave him the floor count, I told him our situation in the same compressed, factual language I use for a clinical handoff. Number of staff, number of patients, ages, conditions, mobility status, nature of the threat, current status of containment. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, "You're on the 4th floor." "Yes." "And the stairwell is bolted from your side." "Yes." "And the service corridor access to your floor has been breached." "Yes. But the threat from that access has not yet presented to the patient corridor." I paused. "We have 14 neonates. The threat appears to be avoiding their location." A longer pause from his end. "Say that again." I said it again. "You're observing the infected exhibiting avoidance behavior specific to the nursery population. The nursery population is now in room 409. The avoidance behavior appears to have transferred with them. One infected individual entered the corridor, oriented toward the infant's location, then redirected." Another pause. The sound of typing, or a radio, or both. "Doctor, I'm sorry, nurse." "Osei," I said. "Dara Osei, registered nurse, charge of the 4th floor." "Nurse Osei, we have a team that's going to reach your floor. It is going to take time. I need you to maintain your current status, maintain your documentation, and I need you to stay on this line or return my call if it drops." "I need to know," I said. "The infants. Is the silence something that has been observed elsewhere? Is this documented?" The pause this time was the pause of a person deciding how much to say. "There are reports," he said, "from other facilities. We are still in data collection on this. I cannot give you a confirmed explanation." "But it's not just here," I said. "No," he said. "It is not just here." I held the phone for a moment. In 409, through the closed door, the silence that had started at 2:14 a.m. was still in effect. 14 infants who should by all biological reason have been crying from hunger, from cold, from the fundamental disorientation of being new, and were not. "How long?" I asked. "For your team to reach us." 2 hours, he said. "At minimum, 2 hours." Priya was watching me. I gave her the number on my face and she received it with the same composure she had maintained all night. The composure that was not the absence of feeling, but the management of it. the professional discipline of someone who understands that her feelings are not currently the priority. "We have the medication supply," I said to Priya after I'd given Officer Dietrich our number and agreed to check in every 20 minutes. "We have the food from the break room. We have everything we need for 2 hours. We need to keep the hallway outside 409 clear," she said. "Yes, which means we need to know where the corridor breach is." I knew what she meant. Someone had to check the West Wing. Someone had to locate where the service corridor breach had placed them and where Gerald Tuck had gone and what else might be moving in the parts of the floor we were not currently occupying. "I'll go," I said. "I'll come with you," Rhea said. She had appeared from 409, where she had been for the last hour, and she was holding a blood pressure cuff in one hand the way you hold something when you need to be holding something. And she looked at me with that specific expression she wore when she had already decided what she was going to do and was telling me rather than asking. "Both of us shouldn't go," I said. "Both of us isn't both of us leaving," she said. "Both of us is one of us going and one of us being backup, in visual range the whole time. You tell me when to stop and I stop." It was a good argument. It was also, under the circumstances, is simply true. "Visual range the whole time," I said. "If I stop, you stop." "Obviously," she said. "Let's go." The West Wing at 7:02 a.m. in emergency lighting, moving in pairs down a corridor that had not been cleared and might not be safe. This is the thing I will always see when I close my eyes for a long time. Not with fear necessarily, with a kind of precise sensory memory that doesn't diminish. The red-tinted light, the linoleum floor catching it, the sound of our feet, the particular quality of listening that is not just with your ears. We found Craig near the end of the West Wing, outside the door of the old physical therapy room that Aldermere had repurposed for storage 3 years ago. He was standing with his face toward the door and his back to us, and he was doing that leaning thing I had heard from the service corridor door, that rhythmic, patient pressing against the surface, withdrawing, pressing again. He did not turn when we came into the corridor. I do not know if he heard us and was not interested, or if his attention was fixed on whatever was in the storage room. I signaled Rhea to stop. She stopped. I took 3 more steps and stopped. From inside the storage room, faint but unmistakable, breathing. Human breathing. Not the flat, cyclic breathing of the infected. The compressed, controlled breathing of someone who has been hiding for a long time and knows that stillness is the only currency they have. Someone was alive in there. Craig continued his rhythmic pressing, not with great force. The door was holding, but with the patience of something that has no concept of giving up, because giving up requires caring about outcomes, and the thing that was using Craig's body did not appear to have that concern. I looked at Rhea. She had seen the same thing I had. She gave me a small, careful nod. I had a choice. I could go back to the station, call Officer Dietrich, report the situation, wait for the team. The protocol choice. The choice that kept me safe and kept the 4th floor in the state we had worked to maintain. Or I could get that person out of the storage room. The calculation ran fast, faster than I expected, because the truth was there was no calculation. There is no moment in 12 years of nursing where I have assessed a situation and decided that the patient could wait because my own position was more comfortable. That is not what the job is. That is not what I am. "I'm going to draw him away from the door," I said to Rhea, very quietly. "When he turns and follows me, you get to the door and get whoever is in there out. You bring them back to the station. Dara, if I get past him, I'll come back around through the medication room corridor. If I don't..." "Stop," she said. "Rhea, stop planning for the version where it goes wrong," she said. "Just go." I walked forward. I said Craig's name at a normal volume, conversational, the tone of a colleague in a hallway. He turned. He fixed on me and he moved, that same forward motion, and I turned and walked away from him at a controlled pace. Not running, pace. And I heard behind me the sound of Rhea getting to the door, the sound of the door opening, the sound of a voice saying, "Oh, thank God," and then footsteps moving back toward the station. I went left into the medication room corridor and came around the long way, and Craig followed me for 30 seconds and then stopped, stood still in the hallway, turned his head toward 409. tilted it, turned around and walked the other way. I stood in the corridor and breathed. The person from the storage room was a second-year resident named Michael Park, who had been on the floor on rotation when it started, who had hidden when he heard what was happening, and who emerged in the fluorescent emergency lighting, looking like someone who had spent 2 hours in a storage room that was the size of a large wardrobe, making the decision to keep breathing. He shook my hand. He shook it for a long time. "We have 2 hours," I told him. "Then we're getting out." The team arrived at 9:22 a.m. Not 2 hours, almost 3. I tracked every minute of those minutes on the clock above the nurse's station, and I did not stop tracking them until I heard the sound in the stairwell that was different from every other sound I had heard since 2:14 a.m., because it was organized and it was moving toward us with the purposefulness of people who knew what they were doing. They took us out in sequence, infants first, then patients by mobility status, then staff. They were masked and gloved and professional, and they did not explain much, which was fine. I did not need explanation. I needed extraction. Ria walked out beside me. Michael walked out behind us. Priya was the last person off the 4th floor because Priya was always the last person out of any room she was responsible for. I do not know what happened to Gerald Tuck. I know he was on the floor when we left. I know the team had a protocol for the floor that they implemented after the evacuation. I know I asked and was told that the situation was being managed, and that was all I was told. Eleanor Tuck recovered fully. She was in a monitored facility for 11 days and then discharged. I received a card from her 2 months later. She did not mention the hospital stay. She mentioned her grandchildren. The infants were all fine. 14 infants, 6 hours to 3 days old, who stopped crying at 2:14 a.m. and started again, every single one of them, at 9:31 a.m., 9 minutes after we got off the floor. In the parking lot of Aldermere Regional, standing next to an emergency response vehicle with a blanket around my shoulders, I heard them start. All 14, through the open doors of the transport units, in the specific, urgent, overlapping key of newborns who have suddenly discovered they are hungry and will not be quiet about it until something is done. I sat down on the curb and I listened to them cry, and I did not move for a very long time. I have been asked in the months since what I think the silence was, whether I have a theory, whether it was protective or coincidental, whether the infants knew something, or whether I have simply built a narrative around a statistical anomaly the way humans build all their narratives, out of the need to find meaning in what is in fact only sequence. I don't have an answer. I have observed that Gerald Tuck, who was moving toward the infants, redirected. I have observed that the corridor outside 409 remained clear for the duration. I have observed that whatever quality of stillness those 14 children carried through the longest night I have ever worked did not break until we were outside and safe. I have decided that some questions are not mine to answer. They belong to the researchers and the epidemiologists and the people whose job it is to find the shape of what happened. My job that night was this floor, these people, these 14 small lives who looked at the ceiling and kept a secret I will never fully know. I still work nights. I still stand at the nursery window at 3 a.m. and listen to the sound of infants crying. I find it now one of the more beautiful sounds I know. The hunger of something new, asking the world to be what it needs. I always answer it.